There was an old man who lived alone in the middle of the forest. He must have been 60 years old if he was a day. But nobody knew his real name. Most folks just called him Old Jake. He had 3 loyal hunting dogs that kept him company on the long, lonely nights. Their names were I Know, You Know, and Calcio. He lived in an old cabin he had built himself, way back in the deep, dark woods. It wasn't very big, but it was just enough for him and his dogs. The cabin only had 1 room in it, and that was his bedroom, his living room, his dining room, and his kitchen too. At one end of his room, there was a nice big open fireplace where he could cook his supper and warm his bones on the cold winter nights. Old Jake loved hunting, fishing, and the great outdoors. He had a little garden where he planted vegetables. He would go out every day to hunt for rabbits and fish. During the warm months, there was more than enough food to go around, but in the colder months, it was hard to keep his belly full. One cold winter night, the old man's stomach was grumbling, but there was nothing to eat in his cupboards but a few moldy potatoes. He stalked the fire in the fireplace to keep the cabin warm. He went to bed. He was just about to fall asleep when he heard something in his room. He opened his eyes just in time to see a shadow creeping across the wall. When he sat up in bed, he peered up in the darkness. His eyes grew wide in terror. Sitting across the room from him was the weirdest looking creature he'd ever seen. It was short, stubby, with pointed ears and bright yellow eyes that seemed to burn with some strange fire. Its body was covered in black fur, and it had big, sharp claws and a long, thick tail. For a moment, Jake just sat there, frozen in fear. He stared at the hideous creature, and it stared back at him. Then, quick as a flash, he grabbed his hunting knife and lunged at the thing. It sprung out and scurried out the hole. It had clawed into the cabin wall. The thing was fast, but so was Jake. A split second before it escaped, he brought his knife down sparingly on its big tail and cut it off. The creature let out a horrible screech and disappeared into the night. Old Jake was left there standing with a long, thick tail in one hand and a bloody knife in the other. Jake was about to throw the tail outside when his stomach started to rumble again. He was famished with hunger, so he took the tail, cleaned it, cooked it, and ate it for his supper. It tasted a bit strange, but there was a lot of it, and it was very chewy. In fact, it kinda tasted like chicken. With his stomach full, old Jake plunged up the hole in the cabin wall with some old rags and newspapers. Then he got back into the bed, and he drifted off to sleep. He hadn't been asleep very long before he was awakened by a strange noise. It sounded like something was trying to scratch its way into the cabin. The old man thought if he stayed really quiet, the thing might go away. He could hear it scratch, scratch, scratch. But then, a strange voice outside hissed,
"Tailypo, Tailypo, I want my Tailypo."
He thought he must be imagining things, but then he heard it again.
"Tailypo, Tailypo, I want my Tailypo."
Old Jake jumped out of the bed, ran to the front door and threw it open. He called out to his dogs. "I know, you know, Calcio, get over here." The dogs came, tearing up the cabin and running around, barking and sniffing and snarling. They couldn't find a thing. Jake stroked his shoulders and went back to bed. He was just about to drift off to sleep when he heard the noise again. This time, the scratching sounded like it was at the window. Whatever it was, it really, really wanted to get in. But the scratching seemed to be on 2 walls at a time. Then he heard the strange voice again. This time, it hissed a little louder.
"Tailypo, Tailypo, where is my Tailypo?"
Old Smitty, who wasn't one to be frightened easily, was getting a little shaky. This was getting really weird, so he eased the window and called, "I know, you know, Kamito, Calico, come over, hey, and see what this scratching at my house. The 3 dogs bound up the porch, and they sniffed around and barked and sniffed, but they never found anything at all. Smitty decided to stay up for the rest of the night to protect himself, his dogs, and his little cabin. So he pulled a chair next to the fireplace, grabbed a blanket from the bed, and settled in for the rest of the chilled, wintry night. Sleep soon overtook him, and once again, he dozed off. It was almost dawn when Smitty woke with a start. The sound of the scratching seemed to ring to every area of the cabin. Smitty searched frantically for his axe, his rifle, or something to defend himself with, but he was so frightened he couldn't find anything. The scratching grew louder and louder.
Tailypo, Tailypo, give me back my Tailypo.
Smithy yelled back as loud as he could. I ain't got your Tailypo, so why don't you leave me alone and go on your own business? I ain't never hurt nobody or nothing, just leave me alone. The scratching seemed to be inside the house now, so loud it was defying.
Tailypo, you took my Tailypo, and I'm back to give it. Give it to me, now!
Smithy pulled the cover up over his head and stayed as quiet as he could, but the scratching was now in his room. Smithy then felt the thing scratch up the bottom of the bed and onto the cover. Smithy eased the cover down to see what was steadily approaching. Then he saw it, a short, stubby creature with pointed ears, fat feet with long claws, and bloodshot red eyes that glowed in the dark, eyes that seemed to burn straight through Smithy. Before he could pull the cover over his head again, the thing pounced on his chest, looked straight down, and said,
You got my Tailypo. Better give it back to me. No.
Smithy said, I ate it. I ate your Tailypo, it's gone. And that thing started to scratch and claw and tear away at poor old Smithy, trying to get that Tailypo back. Smithy tried to fight back, but that thing was too strong, the claws were too sharp. Smithy's scream echoed throughout the dark mountains, then stopped, leaving a chilling silence. After a month or two without hearing from old Jake, the townspeople got worried and came looking for him. They hiked up the mountain and through the forest, but when they reached his cabin, they found it had been torn to shreds. There was no sign of Jake or the dogs. They searched the woods and called out to them. Smithy, I know, you know, Calico. But there was no answer. Old Jake and his dogs were never seen again. The townspeople say that if you're all alone out there at night and you listen carefully, you can hear a strange voice calling on the wind.
Tailypo, Tailypo. Now I got my Tailypo.
So I just saw we have 23 subscribers. Oh my gosh. I'm so flabbergasted. Like, I don't know how to respond to this. Thank you so much. I'm gonna continue to do this, and I'm gonna continue to do it for as long as I can. And in fact, since I am so happy, I'm gonna do a bonus video. So I hope you enjoy this bonus video, and
Good night.
every Saturday when I was a child, my uncle would come over to watch me and my little brother while my mother went to work. We would usually sit on the couch and watch Basement Buddies, which was a live-action kids show about a group of magical kids who lived in another kid's basement. The premise might sound creepy, but the show itself was cheerful in tone. The basement was decorated nicely, and the children usually just drew together on the table or played games. Thinking back on it now, there was no actual central plot line. Why did I ever like it in the first place? Because we watched it almost every Sunday, as if it was a ritual. The children in the basement were all my age, and my uncle would often ask if I would ever like to be one of those kids. I asked if they could ever leave the basement, but I don't remember his response. After a year of this, the tone of the show started to change. I was only 10 years old at this time, but I could notice that the children were smiling less. There were awkward cuts between the scenes, as if the editors had been trying to admit something. Sometimes there were footage of just a single child standing, silently staring to the camera with a cold, angry glare. Uncle Frank would always crack up when this would happen. It was about a week after a particularly boring episode that I was with my mom in the grocery store. We were staying at the register when I noticed several posters hanging up on the wall. Some of them were old enough to have been there for years. "Mommy, look, it's Jason!" I exclaimed. A feeling of confusion pulled closer to the boy's image. He looked so different in the picture. He looked bigger. I noticed in the last episode that his skin was almost as white as flour. "Shh," my mommy tried to quiet me, but I insisted on showing her one of the stars of my favorite show. "It's Jason from Basement Buddies, the one Uncle Frank always shows us." "What's Basement Buddies?" How had I not mentioned it to her before? It's my show about kids. They're all my age and they live in the basement. Jason's on it. He used to tell funny jokes. He doesn't do that anymore, though. My mother finished paying for the groceries before giving me her attention again. When she looked at the poster, her face grew solemn. "And there's Sally, and there's Mark and Donna. They're all on the show." I can't remember much of what happened after that, but I never saw Uncle Frank again. Apparently there was a police investigation, but he had already left his home. None of the children were found, but several of the tapes had been left behind. Most were destroyed. However, the few that remained intact proved very clearly what had been going on in that house. Basement Buddies didn't run on any network. Why hadn't I thought to check? I only wondered how Uncle Frank managed to leave before they caught up to him. I always wondered if maybe my mother had played God's hand.